7:34 morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne on your TV, on your radio and online.
And it's time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning, Spiked editor Tom Slater and anthropologist Mariana Hota. And it's lovely to see you both.
Hello.
Right, we're going to get stuck in, I think, first of all, to high-tax Britain and the Tories really not liking being a high-tax government.
Yes, so Tories at war over calls to cut taxes is the headline here. This becoming a real problem for Boris Johnson and his government insofar as so many different members of the cabinet, so many different backbenchers. There's a lot of kind of Tory leadership to come jostling going on here, I'm sure, as well. Concerned about the rate of the tax rate. Obviously, it's hit a record high, and there's calls essentially for Rishi Sunak to bring that 1p cut to income tax forward potentially in order to placate some of these concerns. Very strong briefing from Number 10, essentially saying that people need to grow up, given the fact that whilst Boris Johnson wants to cut taxes, he has to do it in a sustainable way, in a way that won't add to the issue, and also to make sure that, again, the big kind of spending and relief packages, which a lot of Tories are also advocating for, are actually paid for. I think the thing that this really demonstrates is that the Tories are kind of running around like headless chickens. They don't quite know what they want. They don't quite have a kind of longer-term strategy. There's obviously ideologically they want tax cuts, but at the same time they're not necessarily as forthcoming in how they want to pay for the things that they're also advocating for. So it's all just a bit of a mess.
What I don't understand with this is you talk to any economist and they say tax cuts would be good for inflation, but they also say ultimately, lower taxes are better for tax take. People, you take more, you cut the taxes and you get a higher tax intake because there's less sort of tax avoidance.
I think that possibly depends which economist you're speaking to, Stephen.
No. There's a lot of people say that. You say, and it's generally better for the economy.
Well,
I think especially
it's a question of enforcement because we have huge amounts of tax avoidance. And one of the challenges that came up was that in the conversations around Brexit and how we manage that transition is that the UK is a hub of financial services for international markets. So we don't want to make it for those big businesses. We don't want to make it a kind of an unappealing territory to be involved with. But you also need to kind of look at personal taxes, so things like income tax, national insurance, and Tom's absolutely right. We need the government to have these robust policies that they believe, that they've thought through, and then actually enact in a joined-up way that genuinely makes difference to people's pockets, because people are choosing between which meals to skip. If they want to feed their kids, they're not having a meal themselves. It's 2022. Yes, there's a global recession on the horizon. We're in this inflationary bubble with stagnation and all this stuff that everyone's going, I don't really remember ever learning about that at school, but it's tough. But the bottom line is we need more money in our pockets and we need to keep the economy turning. I think the other thing for me is that we can't just be looking at income tax and at questions around that. We need to be looking at the big other taxes, like windfall taxes for oil and gas giants. The tax that if you've got wealth, basically, you make a lot more money. So money makes money. If you're working a kind of a day job, you're not making money. But the problem with that is, and it's argued by the Tories, but you can see the argument is that if taxes become punitive, what that actually does is dampen the economy. It dampens growth. It dampens entrepreneurship.
And there's always a danger as well that you're kind of missing the broader picture. Like something like the windfall tax, I'm not necessarily against it on principle. You can understand why that would be helpful at a time like this. But the kind of broader problem of how do we bring the cost of energy down is kind of missed when you're kind of just involved in this sort of, small accounting measures here or there in order to try and keep things moving. I think especially, we are an outlier at the moment as far as hiking taxes on ordinary people, on wage packets, day to day, month to month, in the situation in which we're in. And it's just an extra punishing pressure on families at a time when it's very, very difficult and prices are spiralling. And it makes it more unequal because rich people don't feel those impacts, and the hard-working people who you actually notice when they're,
pay packet comes in at the end of the month. You know, they're the folk who are really feeling.
Yeah, well, there was a report yesterday
all people
saying
who are on
that
benefits.
most people feel that they're only 1 month away from penury if they lost the infrastructure, for instance, of their job.
How stressful
they
is
literally
that?
couldn't keep going for even 1 month, and I think there are a lot of people feel that now, and that's not how anyone should be living.
No, and if you own half of Dorset, you're protected from that. Of
course you
if
do.
you've got a massive investment portfolio, great. And you know, you can have a conversation with your accountant and your financial advisors in 6 months' time to discuss how you ought to shape your portfolio to ride out the waves of whatever the new set of legislation is. Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, you need a government, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you sit on, regardless of whether you want high taxes or low taxes, you want a government that has policies that work for people who are working, people who are on benefits,
absolutely.
who are contributing to our society.
Let's move on, or we won't cover many of the other stuff. Last time, because we can't solve the world's problems in just a few minutes. But Marianne, the whole idea of you do something wrong, you're found guilty, you're given.
Community
service. Yes, that's right. But the whole nature of community service seems to be changing.
Well, this is sort of a kind of a fun story on the front of the Daily Star Sunday. Convicts, so people who've been given these community services orders, have been working from home. They've been doing things like making scarves and hats for Ukrainian refugees, knitting. They've been doing things like making PPE, and this has been the case for about 12 months. It was introduced during COVID, when obviously people couldn't be doing their community service orders in public spaces necessarily. Everyone had to stay at home.
Because I always think of community service as somebody who goes out picking up litter and things like that.
It's about the Daily Star's headline says more lags doing lags. I mean,
lags. That's a really
You've got to say it like that.
lags.
So anyway, it is perhaps worthwhile work. No dismissing that.
Absolutely.
But the kind of question is, should we actually have community service that is in public-facing places where the community can sort of see the payback?
So do you want to have community service that makes a difference, or do you want to have community service which humiliates people in front of the public? Does that put them in stocks?
No, well, litter picking shouldn't necessarily be humiliating.
No. But
I don't know, tidying up a park.
But if they can't do something at home that's really worthwhile because you want to, it's like putting people in the stocks. So you can see them and look down our noses at them. Oh, they've been convicted of something.
I mean, you could look at it like that, or you could say there's that sort of contract that's been refreshed where I did something wrong, now I'm making amends, and then we're back to square one, and I can crack on and, you know, do it better next time.
Yeah.
Whereas if I've done it in secret, it's like paying a fine and no one knows, and everyone goes, I just won't mention that.
It's not very transparent, is it? As long as somebody is keeping an eye on them and making sure they get through a quota of producing PPE or something.
Maybe they need like a little badge on their knitted hat saying sort of like made by lags.
Maybe a lag.
Yeah.
I just sort of think if they're doing something which is good and is helpful at the minute, then it doesn't matter where they do it.
Maybe they should do knitting in public.
Yes. Gallery.
Who'd rather do that apart from Tom Daly?
Does he do knitting?
He loves doing knitting in public, and it's a thing, apparently.
It is a thing, yeah.
I mean,
Crochet used to be.
I don't know. Can we have a look? All this chaos going on, we need to move away. We need to travel somewhere, Tom.
Yes.
Can we?
It's going to be difficult this month, as we know what with these historic strikes being called. This story on the front of the Sunday Telegraph is essentially about government attempts to try and undercut the strikes, really. So they're talking about a tweak to the law which would allow agency workers to be brought in to cover for the striking workers. This is also coming down the line is more fundamental change, essentially requiring the railways to maintain a kind of skeleton service even in the event of strike action. I'm not going to make myself popular here by suggesting that these measures are essentially about just trying to undermine the right to strike and to collective bargaining, which I know that people are experiencing the travel chaos and all the rest of it. It is something which is genuinely disruptive, but that's because these workers are being faced with a pay freeze, they are being faced with some job losses, and they have a right to organise to fight for their own interest. And I think these measures are effectively attempts to, in terms of this skeleton crew thing in particular, essentially forcing workers to cross picket lines, which seems to me, given we've got such punishing trade union laws already, is again something which will continue to undermine that right to strike, which it's disruptive, but that's the point of it. It's because they're fighting for their interest.
I'm actually agreeing with Tom on this one. I've got plans that week. I'm really gutted that I might not be able to do the work that I was planning to do. But the right to strike. Trades unions are really important. We've sort of gone into this weird world where we're sort of saying it's Marxist, it's socialist, we want to tear down the world order.
No,
it's
there's a lot of
outrageous
people who've
because it's
contacted
workers.
us. Yeah, but
It's
there's a lot of
workers'
people
rights.
who've got in touch with us saying, what, so they can't earn, they're not happy because they're not getting a pay rise from their 60 grand a year that they're earning as
This
train
is the
drivers.
figure that's constantly. I have
And they're not all train drivers either, because that's a useful foil. But they represent all kinds of workers across the whole service.
The average GMT wage is well above the national average.
And that's because they've got strong unions. I mean, this is the thing.
I think everybody would agree. I mean, it would be nice for everybody to be able to earn a decent wage. But I think a lot of people are worried because they remember the 70s and 80s when this country was hijacked by trades unions, and it was a terrible time. You couldn't get your bins taken away. There was rats in the streets. The miners obviously were on strike. There were flying pickets everywhere. It was a horrible, horrible time. And I think a lot of people remember that.
Yeah.
I think we've got other other organisations as well, groups of workers who are less able to strike, but we need to support them even more. People like teachers, nurses, carers, whose conditions are really terrible, but don't have the strength of the trades union behind them. And I think there needs to be this public support for workers to actually exercise those rights and say, look, this is not okay, because it is in our shared interest that people are paid fairly and they have decent work conditions.
Well, yes, I would agree with some of that, but not all of it. Well, there you go. That's the joy of what we do. That's agree with everything. Mary Ann, Tom, we've got to leave it there for now, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indeed.